Welcome to B2B in the Black's digital fireside chat. I'm your host, Khalow, CEO of BusinessOnline, a performance-driven B2B marketing agency. But more importantly, co-founder of this amazing movement and group we call B2B in the Black. I'm looking forward to introducing our esteemed B2B luminaries. First, representing marketing leadership, Riccardo Caruso, Director of Digital eCommerce, and Analytics at Illumina. Riccardo, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
And representing finance leadership, Logan Zinser, who is the Vice President of Finance from Biosciences. Logan, good to have you.
Good to be here. Looking forward to it.
So we've got a hot topic. This is a good one. Today, we're going to talk about how e-commerce and finance collaborate in the digital age, before and during the pandemic. And I love this, gentlemen, because I think this notion of e-commerce is so important, yet many organizations struggle to understand it, to fund it, and to frankly deliver what your customers needs in the notion of an e-commerce experience. So let's dive right in. First and foremost, gentlemen, I know one of you is at Biosciences, the other one's at Illumina. How did you guys meet?
Yeah. Riccardo, you happy to take that one, or you want me to?
Absolutely. So yeah. I joined Illumina in 2015, and I met Logan just a little bit later. I think Logan, you met a little bit later, but in particular, when it became, the circumstance was like putting together a good business case for a project that needed to have some backup and funding by our chief commercial officer and regional general managers. Then the person to go to was my finance partner, Logan. And so, obviously, we knew each other a little bit earlier than that, but that was really the first time that we started really like to work together and talk about like some of these projects.
Yeah,
and I'm curious, Logan, what was that like? Were you guys talking the same language, or did it take a couple of meetings before you were able to sync up?
Yeah, so I mean, it definitely took a few meetings just to kind of sync up. We were at a push at that time, right? Our CEO had, really ambitious goals to increase the amount of activity that we saw on our e-commerce channel versus kind of the typical like sales activity. So there was definitely that driving kind of top-down initiative to do that kind of stuff. So I think that certainly helped accelerate some of the conversations that we were having. But for Riccardo and I to kind of speak the same language, I think it did take a couple interactions just to make sure that we were kind of in parallel and sync on that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that's a big part of the conversation we're having today, which is, how do you create that bond, right? Because we always talk about in B2B, the sales and marketing bond, and finance is kind of left out there alone. And that common vernacular, the common understanding is so important. And I guess, I'll start with you, Logan. Was there a tipping point where like a conversation began to click? There was something that Riccardo understood about the business or understood about your needs in finance that kind of brought you together. And I'm curious as to, if there's a memory or a meeting that actually began to create that connection.
Yeah. So I think, CFO and finance organizations are very data-driven decision makers, right? So we want to rely upon a lot of the historical data and make sure that any type of investment or activity that we're doing has the appropriate amount of return to it, right? What is inherently tough sometimes, especially on the marketing side, is making that true connection, right? Whether it's a campaign or an event, and tracing that all the way from the lead all the way down to a qualified lead to an opportunity to ultimately seeing that revenue, and really no different from an e-commerce perspective, right? And I think these projects are inherently, expensive relative to other projects that you can do. And they take a certain, I think, muscle that doesn't necessarily exist, especially in a finance organization, to kind of understand that. So, early on, Riccardo was very quick to identify, we need a sound business plan. It's got to be, both qualitative and quantitatively supported. So I think, that early alignment and making sure that we were speaking kind of the same language on that front was incredibly important to make sure that this was successful.
Do you see it the same way, Riccardo? Did it happen that way?
I absolutely do. I think there was a moment, right? Like our connection, really sparked around like some good financial models. So we shared some solid, in this case, like analysis, like on spreadsheets, and we had to model something that was actually quite complex. This was like specific to about like a 200 of Illumina customers. They were using like a different business model with different like fee model. And so crunching all this data to distill it like into something that would be easily consumed by our C-suite executives with a clear indication on how much it will cost and how much we will get in return. The moment we put that together and we were able to click on the numbers, on the models, that was definitely like, I think like a good moment where we were like, okay, we're speaking the same language.
Yeah, and Logan, let me ask you this. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Riccardo over the past year or so, and really having some interesting business conversation. He's unique, right? Because he is a marketer, but he understands business incredibly well. Do you find that to be the case, that the marketers at this level know business as well as they do? And if you don't, how do you coach them into understanding, the analysis and data that you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to pause on Riccardo, I mean, he does have a tremendous amount of knowledge in this space, right? And he does have that engineering background, which I think helps tremendously, to kind of bridge that marketing to finance gap. But to your point, I think it's, you don't see it maybe as often as I would like to see in kind of, the marketing organization, that kind of that business or that finance acumen. So, it's a journey. I think it depends on the individual that you're working with, what kind of tenure do you have with them. But I've found it helpful to kind of, engage with them early and often and kind of bring them along, and let them know, hey, here are the things that I need to see to help justify this kind of expenditure or this project, and it becomes a journey along the way. And the more folks that we can bring along, in that discussion, and really make it a cross-functional type of project, the more success you're going to see, kind of, I think, at the back end. So yeah, that's generally how I've seen it done successfully.
Yeah, and I would say over the past 20 years, the marketers that I see to be most successful, one of the most common threads I see is that they have an eye for being data-driven and understanding the implications of their actions to business and are looking to prove that. But let's shift gears for a second here. I know e-commerce is kind of the hot topic. And, one of the questions I have for you, Riccardo, is, why are companies slower to adopt the notion of, really embracing the notion of e-commerce? Is it because of channel? Is it because of the expense? Is it because of the lack of vision and understanding how to transform business? But I'm always surprised that more large companies like Illumina aren't embracing this channel to drive, production.
That's a great question, Thad. It blows my mind how large companies don't go down that path, because after you run the numbers, there is a clear return. I mean, we could talk, I don't know if we're going to have the opportunity in this occasion, but, I led the design of the e-commerce platform at Illumina in 2016, and I'm redoing it now. And for instance, in 2016, we got a return like within the first year, just by deploying like some pretty simple retailing tactics. So the question is not like, is the model going to return? Is going to give a return. So it is really a combination, I'd say, for sure, of a lack of probably like a leadership vision, but also the maybe like an inability of certain people that drive e-commerce at certain companies to formulate it the right way. And here we're talking about like the importance of the partnership with finance, and it's particularly important because, as a matter of fact, in that first occasion with Logan, right, we were sitting there like with the CCO, and I was like, okay, well, you know what? I want the blessing by finance, like on these numbers. Like, so you guys run the model, right? And then like you bring them back, and then I want to get like, I want to see thumbs up around the table. And the moment you do that, and so you go through the due diligence and you put all the ducks in a row, it's going to happen. So the mind-boggling question is, how come large companies like the Toys R Us, the Barnes and Nobles, and that are, large companies that have been in the market for a long time and don't understand really like the importance of digital transformation, and really taking it on? It's a matter of like, really formulating that vision, understanding the importance nowadays, and even more so today with the COVID, that it is accelerating this digital transformation. take it on. After all, like I can tell you that in 1 year, you're going to be like a different company digitally, and you're going to be on the right track to thrive with your customers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Logan.
Yeah, no, I was just going to, reiterate some of the points. I think, from a leadership perspective, right, I think, e-commerce in a B2C business, I think it's more, pervasive there. But I think in a B2B, especially in kind of the medical device field, I think that it's intimidating to think, are buyers of my medical devices going to be really comfortable buying, some of this product without, a real face-to-face conversation with a sales rep, right? So I think leadership to some degree questions whether or not that's going to be successful, even though, a sound, financial model would suggest that it will be. So, there's a bit of a hurdle there to Riccardo's point.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Logan. And now, do you believe that's because of the data and the way they're reading market trends and user behaviors, and they're interpreting that to say, hey, we're not quite there yet, it's going to take a few more years to mature? Or is it because we're so used to doing business a certain way, there's almost a gut feeling or an emotional connection to being a sales-driven organization, which is done more face-to-face, and they're just not willing to let that go?
That's right. I think it's the latter. Right. I think it is that historical gut, hey, I got to be able to shake that hand before I receive, the actual purchase order for that, for that purchase. So, but I think, if there is beauty from this pandemic, right, one of which is kind of that acceleration to this e-commerce model. And I think, it's definitely going to encourage a lot more adoption and acceleration of that.
Yeah, no doubt. And let me ask you this, what's changed over these past couple of years? I mean, outside of COVID right now, and we can press on that in a moment. But in terms of the funding approach, as we'll start with you, Riccardo, as you make the pitch to do something like this, how has that changed, 3 years ago to where it is today? And then Logan, I'll flip something back to you, but I'm curious. Let's start there, Riccardo.
Yeah. So, years back, I'd say e-commerce was, if we can refer to with some of technical terms that are used in the business, like it was more of an excitement feature. It was like a plus. Now it has become a threshold feature. It's a must-have. And from a leadership perspective, it should be striking to look like at those macro trends and looking at like those companies that have embraced e-commerce, digital, versus those that have not, and how they have grown over, I say, the past 5 to 10 years. It's clear. I mean, the path is clear, right? So I think that Logan referred to this specific drive by the CEO that really drive channel adoption at Illumina. The ask at the time of, when we started to have this conversation with Logan, now even more so, I am deep in those conversations. Those type of conversations were not there in 2015 when I joined Illumina. Right. So at that time in 2015 was kind of like one of those initiatives that, as I say, are injected from the side. That somebody had the vision, right? And took the initiative to drive a project that eventually got funded, right? And opened like a breach in this wall, and showed also that things that were not thought to be possible are actually possible. I'm talking specifically, for instance, of the B2C model that we have brought into the B2B market, but also like the sale, for instance, of instruments. Illumina sells instruments from $20,000 to $900,000, and we sell all of them, right, online. I was at a recent conference in Chicago, and like this e-commerce leader from Danaher came by and was like, I didn't know it was possible. I didn't know it was going to fly, right? But the moment you understand and you think, especially how e-commerce has evolved, and definitely Amazon is the one that sets the bar, think for a moment, try to put a number to the percentage of digital transformation that Amazon has with its customers. It's pretty much 100%. I've never called Amazon, right? Yeah. And now try to apply to your company and see where you're at. Where are you? Are you at 0%, 20%, 40%? And any number far from, the 70, 80% in the B2B space, there's always a certain number of calls and conversations that need to happen offline. That means that you are not in line with the market and how customers want to do business with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me press on one more thing, and then I got a question for you, Logan. You mentioned if you harken back to 2015, right? And someone comes in from the side to say, I've got this vision for e-commerce, and it's probably an uncomfortable conversation because no one's, seeing it the way that you do or whoever's positioning the idea of e-commerce, right,
yes.
Riccardo?
Yes.
How do you pitch that? Is this a fear thing? Hey, fear of missing out, like executive team, if you don't get on board now, you're going to lose customers, you're going to lose share. Is this a growth thing? Hey, this is how we drive growth. I know you're under pressure by the board to drive growth. This is a much better channel. But, because right here we are in 2020, right? And there's probably things that we want to do just like in 2015 we wanted to do then. It seems odd. Let's say we want to move to conversational marketing and we don't want to, have form field. What are the ideas or conversations you can share with the folks listening in today that can help us to propel and innovate at a much more rapid clip than waiting for it to be a very obvious decision?
Yeah. And amazingly, right, Illumina being a cutting edge company in its technology, which is like in the sequencing space, you would think that would be digitally advanced, but it was built by scientists, so product based. So it was the product first, and then it doesn't matter how customers are going to buy. Now, however, that becomes a key component of the competitive advantage of the company. Yet in 2015, this was not absolutely clear. So the winning argument, I remember I just got hired and I'm sitting there like with the C-suite and they're saying like, I don't think that we're going to be funding this project. I mean, literally. Mm-hmm. And I saw like my manager that was like getting those cold sweats and right. Like, and I was coming from many years, like 10 years in the space. And I remember when I was doing B2B, for instance, like I was the B2B global leader at Millipore in 2008. At that time, we were already late in the space. Now we're talking about 2015. And so the winning argument there was, look, we are already late in the space. We're coming late. This is how companies do business, right? And at that time in Millipore, we had 50% of e-business that was coming via e-procurement integrations. And they would laugh at you. They would say like, what? You're talking about like doing integrations with platforms like, Ariba, SideQuest, EDI. Well, reality is that the companies, especially the largest companies, for instance, they do carry over like legacy systems. And, you have to meet that need. On the other end, all the new customers coming in, they're going to be cutting edge, right? A new company that builds itself up like nowadays is already pretty digitally savvy and is going to be expecting to come and being able to serve themselves like sure. on the website 24/7 self-serve. So it's a very interesting question because at that time, the perception of missing out like on the digital trend was not a topic. It is mm-hmm. today, but at that time right. It was more like, well, you know what? We've run like a basic business model. We're going to get like a return on investment and we're late in the space. So this is something that needs to be done. And that's how it got approved.
And Logan, let me ask you this. So yeah. when you're in that room and from a finance perspective and you hear the argument being made in 2015 around e-commerce or, 2020 is something that's new and different and innovative, how does a finance person hear that? Are you hearing risk? Are you hearing money going out the door? Like how do you process that and how do you get to the questions you need to ask and get to a position of feeling comfortable to say yes or no?
Yeah, I think, finance is in a unique position because I think we have visibility to what that long-term, revenue forecast is supposed to look like. And, at the time, what was going through my mind was, that economies of scale kind of standpoint, right? Does it make sense now to invest in, upfront in a large, new channel, that digital channel in hopes of, that channel you can almost grow, exponentially with very little cost once you have that relatively little cost, once you have that structure set up, right? So, I was an early believer in definitely the need for that channel, which I think, allowed Riccardo and I to kind of get on board and kind of, be pointed in the same direction early on. But I think, bringing those folks, the CFO and some of the other C-suite along in the process, definitely took a little bit of time. But I think once we started thinking about, okay, as we scale, does it really make sense to be adding, sales reps, field service individuals, right? And, the amount of utility you get from each one of those individuals, diminishes to some extent. So I think it was the right inflection point at that time, coupled with our CEO wanting to drive digital adoption that made, at that time in 2019, a successful outcome for the e-commerce platform.
So Todd, I want to reiterate a point. This is the value that comes out of these conversations like this one that we're having. Scalability is an element that I mentioned before when talking to other stakeholders, but hearing scalability from Logan strikes me particularly, because one of the things that I've been saying now for a while is when I joined Illumina, it was what I called a $2 billion startup, right? The company that, tremendous potential in the sequencing space, tremendous growth ahead. And one of the key deliverables for me as the owner of e-commerce there was to deliver on the scalability factor. And that is the company is going to scale up and grow fast. How can you support the needs of the company, right? And grow at the same speed from a commercial standpoint. And e-commerce, is able to deliver on that scalability. It's a key point because you always get to that flex point when, as you grow, you're starting to continue building the different departments, right? From customer service, sales, supply chain. And then it gets increasingly difficult to still all be on the same page, right? So, the friction that you meet as you grow as a company is not linear, it's exponential, right? And e-commerce allows you instead to deliver on that scalability. Now, hearing that from Logan, from his finance perspective, it's really, really cool.
That's music. Yeah, that's music. Yep. And you said the word friction, which I think, is a good opportunity to pivot for a second here and just ask the obvious question, how has the pandemic changed? Not only, I would ask two parts. Number one, how has the pandemic changed the view of any B2B business on e-commerce, A, and B, in business in general?
Logan, you want to give it a first?
Yeah, here you go.
Oh, man. Yeah. Where to go? So I think it's undoubtedly it's highlighted the importance of having an e-commerce channel and a successful one at that, right? Certainly the ability for, reps and in-person meetings at customer sites. I think that's by far the exception now versus maybe the norm it was, 12 months ago. So, having that in place is paramount at this time.
So let me share some data points without disclosing, obviously, specific, Illumina information. Of the customer base that, in particular myself, I serve as the director of e-commerce, we do have, those customers, obviously, that are completely offline, those that are lowly adopting, and those instead that are highly adopting. As we got into COVID, those highly adopting have increased adoption. Those lowly adopting or not adopting instead have suffered greatly. Now, customer satisfaction, we do have a customer survey at a confirmation page. So every user, right, that purchases electronically, can submit some voluntary feedback. And that was already positive. Right? We tend to hover around 70-80%, has shot in those months of March, April, and May to 100%. And that is customers were happy that we could allow them to purchase and manage orders 24/7 self-serve. Mm-hmm. That tells you everything, right? Now, what if we would have had all those customers offline or lowly adopting already there? And that tells you, what the roadmap is. It's just very, very clear.
Super clear. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah, no, that's wow. And it's interesting because sometimes, what does Henry Ford say? If they'd asked me to go faster, they would ask me to add another horse, right? Sometimes you got to take that leap of faith to know that you got to invent something that they're not necessarily asking for. And it sounds like, obviously Illumina being a very inventive company is doing that. One of the questions that we punted around is, just the notion of funding, whether, it's owned and funded by marketing or commercial. I'm wondering, Logan, do you have your point of view on that, and how has that worked in the past?
Yeah, so I think commercial, whether or not they specifically own the funding for this, meaning it kind of rolls up into their cost centers and so on and so forth, I think that's trivial. What commercial needs to do is believe in it, right? They need to believe in the e-commerce channel, and they need to consider it an important channel that complements their overall kind of sales team. So that's generally kind of how I think about it. I think it took a while for Illumina to kind of get to that point where it was kind of part of the big C, if you will, versus kind of just kind of and here's this other channel that marketing owns off to the side. But I would love to kind of get Riccardo's thoughts on that one too.
I'm gonna get myself in trouble here.
We like trouble, good trouble, yeah.
Controversy, good controversy.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because over these past 5 years, I've been within, the marketing organization. But it's clear that especially when we talk about e-commerce, we're talking about sales, right? So marketing is extremely important for a company like Illumina to do lead gen, right? Qualify prospects, and we have the model where we sell the instrument, and then following that, right, we sell the reagents, a little bit like the printer type of model, right? But when it comes back to the e-commerce, that I'm dealing with, we're talking about existing customers, so inbound traffic, recurring purchasing. And it becomes very much a key function, like on the commercial side. So it is paramount to have the partnership with a commercial organization. Yeah. So it's really a good question. Is e-commerce, in this case, this type of e-commerce for Illumina, more marketing or more commercial? And I tell you that when I get into the leadership meetings for marketing versus commercial, those for commercial apply a lot more to the e-commerce needs than those for marketing.
That's right. So
now this is the situation specifically for Illumina, the type of company that it is. But I think at the end, e-commerce in this case has a lot to gain by either being within commercial or having that strong partnership with commercial.
And I'll start with you, Logan, and we'll go to Riccardo. When you implement an e-commerce solution, you get it running, you get it going. Outside of the obvious benefits of some of the things that we've just mentioned in terms of obviously getting a more scalable channel and even increasing customer support, what are the other positive side effects to doing this? Right? Does it give the team more confidence to go invest in other ways to serve the client digitally? Does it help you find more efficiencies, and all of a sudden you understand greater efficiencies roll out, so now you create efficiency programs? And I'm curious, because I've got to guess there's some real good drafting, like you had good success, and then all of a sudden it opens up this huge opportunity to go knock down other projects or other visionary ideas.
Yeah, you got it. So, I mean, besides offering, what could be a competitive advantage in the field that you're in, I think it allowed the commercial team to prospect more and find new customers and spend less time actually, managing the existing customer base that we have, which ends up taking a lot of the individual's time, right? If you can get them on, an e-commerce type of purchasing, process, I think that allowed those reps to go out and hunt for more prospective clients. So that was kind of the immediate, I think, secondary benefit that we saw when we were standing up this e-commerce project.
Yeah, I'd add to that. Illumina, right, has been like a front player in the space. So, that vast majority of the sequencing data in the world comes from Illumina systems. So for many years, until I'd say recently, there was that, the saying that, customers will find a way to buy from us. And it's true. It's true, but it's not sustainable. I mean, you know better, right?
What a hell of a statement. Yeah.
Yeah. And we got feedback, and we're talking about 2015, where the customers would say, we love your products, but we hate to buy from you, right? And that is not, again, like a statement that they should make you feel warm and fuzzy in the long run.
No.
Right.
Now that there is rising competition, the speed to market, the speed to insights, as I call it, is becoming paramount. And I'd say if a company like Illumina is able to take care of that digital relationship, of that aspect, then it can start focusing also on the next level. And anybody who has gone through the ABC of business knows that companies start like from a product first, they're product based, and then eventually like they evolve into services, right? And now they evolve, for instance, for Illumina, into software informatics. Right, you need to be able to have the bandwidth to focus. So get all the sand in the gears out, right, and have a well-oiled machine that works well. It's efficiency.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, and I don't think a lot of folks are realizing that, because I think it's more about the transaction and focusing on increasing wallet share, especially with e-commerce. And I'm curious, just anecdotally, in terms of this confidence in going direct, right? I see a lot of B2B companies having real struggles with understanding they're cutting out distributors. And I'm not exactly sure, in terms of the business model or any conflict that either one of you have with your current organization. But is that an issue? And how do you have that conversation to make sure that, these things can get pushed forward?
Absolutely. So for me, like I've been in those conversations for the past now 15, 20 years. It's a fascinating one, right? It depends company by company and where they're at in their growth. There's no doubt that every time you get a distributor, right, you're leaving something on the table. So you want to do that in order to still like come out in the black within that type of relationship. So what does a distributor do for you? It really makes available to you channels of distribution. So when you are talking about now being able to reach the far corners of the markets, right? And being able to serve your large customer base, address the tail end. I mean, e-commerce there is king, right?
Yep.
So Logan was referring to it before. So it's something that really allows you to do that. So eventually it gives you one more powerful weapon that you can bring, to the table to discuss, are we doing, are we leveraging well, the relationship with this distributor or not? Should we think about like starting to go direct or not, right? But if you don't do that, you are stuck with a distributor. And often the distributor is the one that is e-commerce advanced, right? Yep. And right now, most recently, I'm hearing more and more from customers, that they are asking to being able to do business directly with you. They don't want the distributor. So, and for you as a company, you're building trust and a relationship with the customer, which is the essence for, a long-term relationship and maximizing, right, the customer lifecycle value. And, that is paramount.
Yeah. Logan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Riccardo hit it right on the head there. I mean, just to touch on a few. I mean, clearly, if you can capture some of the margin that you're losing through your distributor, I mean, that's a really nice to have. But I think the customer experience, just to touch on that a little more, is super important. I mean, using a distributor, there's a lot about that customer base that you're using a distributor network for that you don't have visibility for, right? There's oftentimes filtering of information from the distributor that they're seeking from the end customer that you kind of have to sift through and really just kind of make use of, versus if you're hearing it directly right from the horse's mouth or the customer's mouth in this case. So yeah, I think those are kind of the highlights that I definitely agree with that Riccardo brought up.
Well, I love it when I hear CFO or VP of finance or anyone in a finance leadership role talk about customer experience, right? Like that's an enlightened finance leader. I love that. Okay, let's move into the last kind of chapter of this conversation. and one of my favorite actually, and that's prediction. So I'm curious, what would you predict that we are we're not understanding the importance of what's about to happen, right? In terms of the market today. So, moving outside of e-commerce or just connecting to e-commerce, that's great. But just thinking about B2B and business in general and understanding we're in this COVID environment, what are folks not paying enough attention to, and they should be as they're planning out their steps over the next 3, 6, or 9 months?
Yeah, I guess for me, and gosh dang it, we certainly don't have a crystal ball around when we think there's any return to normalcy, whatever normalcy may be. So, from with my finance hat on, right, there's going to be, this notion around liquidity and making sure that that companies are right-sized, I think is the big thing that a lot of organizations should be thinking of, not just within the finance organization, but definitely the C-suite, and I think some of the, the large departments within that company. So, again, e-commerce being a perfect example of that. How many companies would die to be able to go back a couple of years ago, invest heavily in their e-commerce system right now to have a very well-oiled, e-commerce machine right now? I think, it would certainly be a few. So, I think, thinking about, these long-term investments, investing for the future, and not just looking a year out from a budgeting perspective, but a multi-year type of view, and going through these kind of rolling forecasts, I think is something that I think we all should be thinking about.
Yeah, let me just unpack that for a second, because you mentioned right sizing, which, if I heard it, which is basically most likely more trimming, right? I think what you're saying is we got to be. Companies have to be ready to continue to squeeze the belt as we see how this is affecting us, and we're not through the worst of it. Like, there's going to be a couple more cycles to go. Is that fair?
Yeah. I think that's one of the big things that I think about is how long, can this persist, and what, if anything, we should do in advance of that.
Sure. Riccardo.
It's an interesting one, right? So, a few points. One was we talked about what's happening today, right? And in regard to customers that are highly adopting versus lowly adopting. And when we look at forecasts over the next 6 and 9 months, I tell you, I find predictable those forecasts around the highly adopting customers, because they haven't changed behavior that much other than actually adopting even more. But I know that they are in business. I know that they are healthy and they are cranking, right? Those instead lowly adopting are the ones that are keeping me up at night, because I don't know how it's going to go. I know that those that are like very digitally savvy, they're running their business and they're going to be there, down the road. This COVID is putting a strain on companies, and better, especially those companies that eventually are on the edge, financially or at whatever point that they are at, that they can eventually sustain this period of crisis for 3 months, 6 months. When is it going to get that moment that they're going to get off the cliff, right? So those that are not digitally savvy, I have some worries about, and bring that unpredictability. In regard to what Logan was saying on accelerating, I would invite every company to have that conversation. I wished that even ourselves at Illumina, we would have further accelerated. We did tremendously well, right? In 2016, we launched a new platform that has now increased the sales online by 400% in 3 years. That's a good accomplishment. We have doubled orders in channel adoption, yet we still have, quite a bit to go. And so the challenge here is really to get that vision around e-commerce across the C-suite. And so that takes vision top down, right? And requires time to align. And so once you put all the elements together, you understand that if you are at the beginning of those conversations within the company, it's going to take you, years before you get there? So start the conversation as soon as possible. And, possibly from the top down, possibly if you are not at the top already, try to convince the top and have the right conversations. And hopefully those that are enlightened with this e-commerce vision are going to be able then to start like turning the curve for the company and getting on the right road right now.
You make it sound easy, Riccardo. You make it sound real easy. Well, look, this was fantastic. I really appreciate you sharing your stories, your insight, and helping us drive this type of conversation forward. And the notion of e-commerce and just everything it signals in a B2B organization, is so paramount to where this industry is going. Pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID. So I hope the folks listening today got something out of this. But Logan and Riccardo, I truly appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You got it. Yeah,
It has been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure too.